It does seem that between the sort of the turn against Reconstruction in the South and the ascent of liberal Republicans in the North, which we talked about in class, that there's almost this like nationwide turn against democracy in the United States in the 1870s.
Well, a lot of it is posed that way, that democracy, the people.
It's good government versus this unruly demos, this unruly public.
Good government needs a limitation of the suffrage. Mm-hmm. North and South, not just among blacks in the South, immigrants, poor people in the North.
Your former student, Sven Beckert, has this amazing part of his book, Mighty Metropolis, which is also an article in Past and Present, about this campaign to restrict suffrage in New York City in the
1870s. They tried to have a new charter, a new city charter. Mm-hmm. Samuel J. Tilden, who runs in 76.
Yeah, this close to being our president.
Yeah, and he was the architect of this, and it basically was to put back a property qualification for voting, so that poor people just couldn't vote, because the idea was the city should be run like a business. Mm-hmm. It should be run on efficiency grounds and, kind of without spending a lot of money. So you hear this around today, of course. Mm-hmm. City should be run, well, if it's a business, then the shareholders should determine what the policies are, and the shareholders are property owners. And the Irish immigrant or the German or the poor laborer is not really a shareholder in the city, and therefore, now, of course, what happens? The people vote down this. People generally don't
want their vote taken away.
They don't vote to disenfranchise themselves. So the charter fails. That's why, from some people's perspective, you get, then in the 1880s, the emphasis is civil service reform. Yeah. It's not limiting the right to vote. It's limiting who can hold office.
I think it was Nancy Cohen in the Reconstruction of American Liberalism, right? She's extending that story into the Gilded Age.
Right. Exactly. So you need to be able to pass an exam to, you have to be sort of a college-educated guy to hold public office, and very few people are college-educated at that time. So you attack the bad government that way by purifying. You can't purify the electorate. They do in the South from the point of view of the Redeemers, but you can't really do that in the North. So you purify the office holders, right? And those impulses go all the way down into the progressive era. This is beyond
that's what's really remarkable to me. It seems like there are lots of ways in which the legacies of this Reconstruction moment are stronger for much of American history than the Civil War. But the Civil War is the thing that everyone knows about and cares about, but it's the stuff after where so many crucial moves are made.
Yeah, it's true. And in the progressive era, you get the same debate. Who should vote and who should hold office? And what do you do about bad government? Now, they've eliminated blacks in the South, but bad urban government. And the same thing of trying to purify the electorate in one way or another, And even the progressives who want good government are often willing to have laws like residency requirements and others to kind of limit who really should be voting. There's a lot.
And this is like segregation, right? As a quintessentially progressive measure,
absolutely.
Like not an aberration.
Absolutely. It fits in. One might almost say that black disenfranchisement is a progressive measure. At least that's how it was presented in the South, as a good government measure to eliminate all the violence and all the fraud in Southern elections. You get rid of the black vote, and then white people won't have to be fraudulent anymore, Which
also makes what's going on in the South and toward the end of the 1860s just one of the most extraordinary moments, I think, in the history of American democracy, where you see this forging of this interracial coalition in this region, of course, that had been enslaved until just yesterday.
Yeah.
And that just it's seeing this period as this sort of tension between this KKK and other drive to create basically a white coalition versus African Americans. The durability of this interracial coalition really is remarkable, even if it's
it is very remarkable and quite unique in the long road, a long story of American history. Even if you look at politics today, in the southern states, you have virtually no interracial. In the North, yes. The North and the West.
There's just that Times article you mentioned in class. It's more divided than ever the South is.
Right. And 90% of white Southerners are voting Republican, and 95% of black Southerners are voting Democrat. Mm-hmm. So what kind of interracial politics can you have under those circumstances? That is not true in the rest of the country. The Republican Party does tend to be pretty white in most places now, but there are still black and Hispanic Republicans, and the Democratic Party is much more racially diverse. But in the old slave states, interracial politics is still and always has been a very, very difficult sell, so to speak.
Yeah.
It lasted. You had it after the Voting Rights Act, for a while, in 1965, you had blacks now being able to vote again for the first time since the end of, the disenfranchisement. And you got people like Jimmy Carter. You got that generation, Dale Bumpers in Arkansas, I guess.
Even like Bill Clinton,
Bill
himself as the
Clinton,
heir of his-
Carter, some of the others who did pull in both black and white votes as Democrats. I think from the election of Reagan, really, that begins to really fall apart as the Republican Party identifies itself. Of course, Nixon started it, but even much more so with what they call the Southern strategy, the backlash strategy. And blacks are voting almost entirely Democratic. So the space, now it's coming back again in places like in the fringes of the South, Virginia, North Carolina to some degree, although not necessarily right now, Florida.
Well, it's like with suburbanization.
Suburbanization, people moving in from other parts of the country. But other southern states have not yet experienced that, although may down the road.